better than crud. I like birds and things, creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus. And hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here live in studio with my co-host,
Rebecca Wood!
Yay! And the fact that we're both here together means that we have the open phone line, and so we could be here with you at any time at 877-909-1007. And also, you might notice I'm a little out of breath again, because once again, I forgot my cell phone in the car.
Oh, Joe.
So I had to run back out and get it so that you could, if you'd like, anytime during the show, text in at 419-973-5841. And we're here on our wonderful show, For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. We talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of you, your friends, your family, your pets, whatever kind of critters you might happen to see out your window or see if you go walk into the park. Because, like it or not, we're all mixed up together in this great big planet that we call Earth. And we need to do some protecting of it. So we'd like to talk about a whole bunch of different issues on For a Green Future, pretty much anything that affects the ecology or the environment, which is pretty much everything. And so we have got a great show lined up for you today. Rebecca and I will be chatting with you about whatever you'd like to chat about for the next 15 minutes or so. And then we have an interview with Paul Gunter. And Paul Gunter is from the Beyond Nuclear International, which is an organization that looks at nuclear power. The reason I'm having him on is because he, over in China, they have had a little bit of a problem with one of their nuclear reactors. I don't know if you know, but China has been kind of breaking records in terms of putting up nuke plants. They've been slapping them up, you know, with just a couple of years with almost no oversight. And one of their brand spanking new reactors is seems to be leaking and could be having a bit of a problem. So Paul Gunter is going to talk about that at about 10:15. Then we'll hear from our wonderful advertisers and patrons. And then Rebecca is going to talk to us about cotton.
Yippers.
Yeah, she's done some extensive research. I can see it right in front of me. She's got the notes there.
Assuming I can read any of it in my handwriting.
Well, let's hope so. Then we'll talk about ecological news. And then, of course, hopefully at some point, any point during the show, we'll hear from you, either by text at 419-973-5841 or by phone. You can call in at 877-909-1007. So today is Sunday, the 20th, and it's a couple days worth noting. For one thing, it's Father's Day.
Indeed. Happy Father's Day.
Yes, happy Father's Day out there to all you fathers. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you folks to call in about is if your father helped introduce you to nature. Like I know my father was he was a scoutmaster in our scout troop, or assistant scoutmaster, I should say. So he would take us out camping and He would take us fishing, and he took us, like our family did a couple trips up to the Adirondack Mountains as a family, staying in a cabin up there, fishing for trout in the really cold streams up there. Did you have experiences like that? Did your father teach you to hunt or fish or hike or take you on hikes in the mountains? And share your father nature stories with us.
Yeah, we used to go hiking in the Adirondacks when we lived in Plattsburgh.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a beautiful place, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually even gotten, I was just there a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and the forests are deeper,
Excellent.
and it's more wild there than it was when I was a kid.
I just want to point out that they do let the ground get all wrinkly, which seems strange to people from Northwest Ohio. We don't tolerate that kind of thing.
No, I guess we like flat ground around here.
Yeah, it's very neat and no deviation to speak of.
So did your father introduce you or give you any lessons about nature? Did they teach you anything like, the best way to find a turkey in the woods or something like that? Share with everybody at 877-909-1007. Today is also summer solstice, which is worth noting. So this is the first official day of summer, the longest day of the year. And oddly enough, even though the days are going to start getting shorter, of course, it's going to keep getting hotter, and which doesn't make much sense to us.
It's like there's just sort of a lag,
Yeah, there's like momentum built up.
Right.
And so we're not yet at the hottest part of the year, but the days will start getting shorter again. And I'm kind of grateful because I've been waking up at like 5 in the morning. I don't know about you folks, but that early sunlight really cuts into the sleeping.
Especially if you have a dog and he decides that you rolled over, plus he can see daylight, so it must be his breakfast time.
Right.
And he's going to stand on your pancreas until you agree with him and come around to his point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, I most certainly do have a dog. We have a little puppy, and
puppy.
Yes, a little. She's 80% beagle, but her coloration and her fur and everything is part of that 15% of her that's collie. So she looks like this tiny little collie.
But a sawed-off collie, as it were. Yeah, squashed.
And she's got the speed of a collie. She doesn't flump along like a beagle. She's like, she can go so fast. She's like a blur.
Wow.
But I've been involved in in doing the housebreaking of our puppy for the past month or so, and I got to say that's kind of a chore. I didn't really.
So what? I've never even done that. Well, you just take the dog out a lot, right?
Right, and then
whenever it looks like it might go to the bathroom, you just take it outside.
Right, and
in an hour, time to go out again.
Keep lavish praise on the dog when they do what they're supposed to,
Outdoor
where
potties,
they're supposed to, and then you show obvious displeasure when they do what they're supposed to, where they're not supposed to.
Okay,
that's all I know. Maybe some of our listeners have a better, more efficient way to do it. But
is there a potty training camp you can just send them to? They have one for human children too.
Well, the odd thing was that when she first came to us, she was pretty much housebroken because the culture of that pack there, because she was raised at a beagle rescue, or she was raised in a litter of about 8 puppies, and all the dogs in that group they always went outside, so she just went along too, but she never really internalized it. She was never like, oh, I'm not supposed to go in here. It was just like, oh, everybody else is going out. So
plus she doesn't see her new family going to the bathroom on the lawn, so why should she?
That could be it. That might be what's going on, because she sort of de-housebroke. I guess she house fixed herself after like a few days. We were blissful for those first couple days. We were like, oh, we got a housebroken dog, and then she's never mind. So so it's just a reminder that these cycles of the fact that it's summer solstice, these cycles sort of affect us all. That this is a shared experience over the whole planet. That up here in the northern hemisphere, it's the longest day of the year, of course, but down in the southern hemisphere, it's the shortest day of the year. So, right, because we're at that.
And the drains go a different way, counterclockwise or something.
They do. I used to think that was a myth, but then I've read things that say that is actually what
said
happens.
In Ranger Rick's Nature magazine. How dare you?
Well, I thought it was sort of a random thing that it might go one way one time, but nope. Yeah, So we're all affected. We have lots of proof, lots of indirect evidence that we're all together on this big one single sphere that's spinning around in space.
For sure.
And we just sort of have to keep that in mind when we're looking at environmental issues. And one of those environmental issues, of course, that we talk a lot about on For a Green Future is nuclear power, because nuclear power is not part of a green future, no matter what the nuclear. I've started calling them nuclear zombies.
Nothing that produces waste that is going to be still here several thousand years from now is not green.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Or clean.
I say, with nuclear power, you're trading a 200-year problem, because that's about how long CO2 takes to come out of the atmosphere, about 200 years, for a 200,000-year problem, because that's how long plutonium's going to be around, causing cancers and genetic defects and all kinds of nasty things. And so whenever we hear anywhere on the world that there's a nuclear plant that's leaking, that's bad news for all of us. And
it's like when your lifeboat is leaking and there's a bunch of sharks around.
Right. It doesn't matter which end of the lifeboat is leaking.
Right.
It could be the far end, but it's still going to affect you at your end.
Indeed.
So, when I heard about this nuclear plant that's having problems over there in China, I called up Paul Gunter, because he originally worked in the nuclear industry, and he's an engineer. So he knows the technical ins and outs and the nuts and bolts of how nuclear power plants work. And so he understands what's going on in this crisis that they're having over there in China, which China doesn't admit to. China's saying it's not a crisis. Nothing's going on. Look the other way, folks.
Yeah.
But we can't afford to. So, Josh, I think we're ready for our interview with Paul Gunter. So go ahead and bring it on up here. If you could just give us your name and your title.
Yes, my name is Paul Gunter. I'm director of the Reactor Oversight Project at Beyond Nuclear here in Tacoma Park, Maryland.
Okay, well, welcome to For a Green Future, Paul.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. The reason I wanted to invite you on the show this week is because we have kind of a technical situation with a nuclear reactor in China, and you're pretty experienced in the technical areas of nuclear power. There's a reactor. I understand that it's sort of jointly owned by a French company and the Chinese government. And there's been reports in the media, somewhat conflicting reports. Some are saying there's a leak there. Others are saying it's a buildup of gases. What do we know about what's actually happening in China?
CNN reported on June 14th that they had learned of a U.S. subcontractor with Framatome, which is the French utility and nuclear industry there, that the U.S. representative had contacted the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission to ask for an exemption from export restrictions, that they could talk about a reported imminent radioactive threat from the Daishin Unit 1 nuclear power station. These are Daishin 1 and 2 are two called evolutionary power reactors. They're third generation nuclear power stations that the French government is marketing. They tried it here in the United States, failed here, but Japan, Finland, and the United Kingdom have purchased these EPRs, as they're called. Daishin Unit 1 began operation in December 2018, and it had gone through its first refueling in mid-2020, and apparently it developed a... we were not really sure if it was a design problem in the fuel rods or if it was wear and tear, debris in the reactor primary coolant, or if in fact it was a manufacturing problem. But apparently 5 fuel rods are damaged and are leaking noble gases into the primary coolant of the reactor, And it's being reported that the Chinese operator has been venting these noble gases to the atmosphere after treatment. But nevertheless, that means that some radioactivity is getting out into the atmosphere. Now, this is not to be misconstrued as a major accident, but it is in fact an ongoing indication of the routine and accidental radioactive releases that occur during operation from nuclear power stations all around the world. Fuel failure is not an uncommon event, and these radioactive releases do occur, primarily of concern. These are the noble gases, radioactive xenon and radioactive krypton, which in their decay chain means the release of radioactive cesium and radioactive strontium. That's how the decay chain works.
All right, so let's back up a little bit here. So these noble gases, where did they physically come from? They weren't trapped in the fuel rods, were they, or how are they? Where do these gases come from?
The noble gas, the radioactive isotopes of xenon and krypton principally, are part of the fissioning. They're daughter products, as they're called, of the fissioning of uranium-235, which has been enriched in these thousands of fuel rods, which are then in hundreds. They're congregated in assemblies, which are then loaded into the reactor core and then allowed to fission. And they we're not really sure if how they're escaping from the reactor fuel assemblies. It could be problem in cladding, or it could be cracks in the tube walls. But nuclear power stations have what they call a defense in depth. That the very first defense mechanism in a nuclear power station's reactor core are these thin-walled tubes that make up the fuel rod, and the uranium pellets are inside those fuel rods. And so they act as that first barrier. Ultimately, you have the reactor containment itself as the final barrier. But we're seeing degradation in a reactor fuel assembly, probably 5 different rods. That's occurred within less than a year. So the concern, the broader concern now is very likely there are going to be other fuel assembly failures along the way here. So that's what. But again, the problem here is that China has not shut this reactor down to conduct inspections. In fact, what we're learning is that the levels of radioactive noble gases in the reactor coolant are pretty much greater than what France would require its reactors to shut down. So instead, China has doubled the amount of allowable radioactive xenon and krypton in its reactor coolant so that they can continue operating.
So that's pretty handy to be able to just sort of redefine dangerous and say, okay, the French say this level's too dangerous to continue. We need to be cautious and shut down. And that used to be the standard in China, but now China's just said, we'll just double that, and now the problem's solved.
Well, these technical specifications for, requiring the technical shutdown if radioactive levels in the primary coolant increase over the technical specification. This is a French design reactor operating in China. The Chinese government bought this EPR 1600 from Electricité de France. So the technical specification by design is the French standard. China has now exceeded, they've doubled the amount, as best we can tell by the media accounts. They've doubled the amount that they're going to allow the Taishan Unit 1 to operate at. But again, we're learning that there are trace amounts of radioactivity that are being released following treatment, and eventually some of this does turn into radioactive fallout. I'll just mention, it's a different kind of reactor, but the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station in Plymouth, Massachusetts, it's now shut down. But in the mid-1970s, they had a fuel core problem, degraded fuel cladding that caused radioactivity to be released to the atmosphere. And in that case, Massachusetts Department of Public Health revealed in a 1990 study that rare adult leukemias increased by 400% in the 5 communities most immediately around the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station in Plymouth. And they had to rip up the parking lot of asphalt because it was radioactively contaminated. So while what we're learning right now in China, the information is very restricted, by the way, appears to be minor. These fuel cladding failures can be consequential. But again, the whole concept of containment, however, which is designed to keep radioactivity in, it's inherent in the operation of these plants. What we're seeing here in China is that containment is also applying to information about radioactivity. So, we're not really clear if the emphasis is on containing the radiation or containing the information.
Well, the French must be fairly concerned about what's going on if they're trying to find some American technology that could help the situation.
Again, the leak of information came from a U.S. Contractor with the French government, and they needed to get clearance from the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission because of nuclear export requirements. Let's be clear, the Chinese government operates the Taishan nuclear power station, and there have been problems with the China General Nuclear Company because of its association with the Chinese military and nuclear operations there. So, there are nuclear non-proliferation treaty issues related to the connection between nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And that's initially how this information got out, because of those restrictions on, particularly for U.S. contractors that are working with this Franco-Chinese nuclear power station. But again, it's now more complicated by the fact that the Chinese are operating independent of their French design technical specifications, and they're operating beyond what the French would allow their nuclear power station to operate. The EPR there in China was the first evolutionary power reactor to fire up in December of 2018. The second unit there started in November 2019, but there are 4 other EPRs, French designs, still under construction around the world, in Finland, in the United Kingdom, and also in France. But these reactors are way behind schedule. They're way over budget, and the Chinese were actually the first to get theirs online.
Right, but I think that one of the reasons that the other plants are so far behind in construction is they keep finding design problems, technical problems that they have to solve, right? It's not just a matter of being slow to get some...
Exactly. Again, the problem may be that the Chinese are playing fast and loose, not only with French technical specifications for their design, but also for the oversight and regulation of their own construction and, proofing that these designs are safe.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for giving us an update on this developing story. We'll definitely keep an eye on it, and if people want to follow, more, if get more information about what you folks are doing, how would they do that?
You can visit us on our website at beyondnuclear.org, or check us out on Facebook at Beyond Nuclear.
All right, and I would want to thank again Paul Gunter for coming on and talking to us about that. We're back live in the studio with Joe DeMare and Rebecca Wood. What do you think about this, folks? Does it concern you that the Chinese government is, remember, the Chinese government hasn't really mentioned this to the world community. It was sort of leaked out by a contractor for the French government who was helping the Chinese government try to deal with the problem.
Yeah, that's reassuring.
Yeah. So, I was going to ask, so do you folks trust China to be, to take care of this problem, or are you a little concerned about this? You can give us a call at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. Or you can text at 419-973-5841. Do you think the Chinese are handling this in a good way? I mean, they're kind of following suit in a way, because a lot of countries, once their nuclear plants start leaking, just increase the allowable level of radiation, not based on any kind of studies or anything, just sort of based...
Sounds familiar, not in a good way.
Yeah. But it's an important story, and like I say, we'll keep on top of it. So right now, one thing we like to keep on top of is our commitments to our advertisers and our patrons. Well, I just letting you know that For a Green Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And there's several ways you can get a hold of them. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to go to their website, which is at wcparks.org. And you can go on any app store and search for their app at WC Parks. And, of course, they're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all those other wonderful social media. So that's the Wood County Park District. And our patrons also are essential parts of the financial foundation that helps bring this show to you every week. And our patrons are wonderful people who've gone to patreon.com. That's Patreon. And they searched for a Green Future, and up popped our little page there on Patreon. And people picked a membership level that met what they could afford. And every month a little bit comes out of their checking account and comes over to us. And that's one of the ways we can bring you this show. So our patrons have our everlasting gratitude here on For a Green Future. And thank you very much, and please consider becoming one of them if you appreciate getting information here that you don't really hear anywhere else. And along those lines, Rebecca has prepared some information for us. As I'm sure you know now, Juneteenth is an official holiday here in the United States of America.
It's the first Juneteenth ever.
Yeah,
officially.
The first official Juneteenth,
yeah.
Right. There's been all those other Juneteenths were unofficial, but I'm sure they were.
Had a barbecue yesterday. It made the dog bark a lot because they had not consulted him about whether or not they should do this.
Well, So you got to wonder, does food taste better at an official Juneteenth barbecue, or
I think it does.
probably? Okay. So anyway, looking at Juneteenth from sort of an environmental, ecological angle, Rebecca, you've come up with some interesting information for us.
Right, yeah. I thought I'd talk a little bit about cotton, because cotton has a lot to do with why we have Juneteenth, because Juneteenth is a celebration of freedom. But the reason they were celebrating freedom is because prior to that, there was a lot less freedom. Why was there a lot less freedom? Well, because as in with the thing with China, and a lot of things that we talk about on this show, freedom and democracy and stuff like that gets in the way of people making money. And what did they want to make money on? Well, one of the biggies was cotton, the cotton plant. Cotton plant's in the mallow family. Its fibers are almost pure cellulose, which is why it's useful to humans, although it's useful to plants in that they're supposed to help disperse the seeds more. There's just sort of, little short flights. I'm not sure how that works. I mean, cotton bolls are pretty heavy, aren't they?
Well, but the individual seeds can attach to just a few of the cotton fibers and sort of get carried along.
Kind of like a dandelion.
Yeah,
all right.
Exactly.
Interesting. So it's a shrub native to the tropics and subtropics, although there's tree cotton in India. Worldwide, it's all over the world. It was independently domesticated in the Old and New Worlds. Most varieties are native to Mexico. The oldest cotton fragments, they found some that were from 6000 BC in Peru, some from the 5th millennium BC in the Indus Valley in India, or I guess that's actually in Pakistan, isn't it? The Indus Valley.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I gotta get a fix on that. It's confusing, but yeah, the world apparently produces 25 million tons annually of cotton, and the U.S. is the largest exporter. There's 4 basic commercial species, but 90% of what's grown is called upland cotton, which is native to Mexico originally. Oh, Mexico, the Caribbean, and South Florida. It actually comes naturally in white, brown, pink, green, and red colors, but most of the colors are banned in a lot of places because they don't want the white getting contaminated. I don't know.
That's interesting, yeah.
They could still dye it. I don't know what their deal is, but yeah. It comes from the Arab word Qutn, something like that. Qutn, I think.
Okay.
Although the Greeks and Arabs found about it originally during the wars of Alexander the Great, who brought it back from India. Europeans, it was introduced to Europe when the Moors conquered Spain. So it went on a little journey there, kind of around the coast and up. And Europeans, who first thought it was actually little tiny sheep growing on trees.
I did not know that, but I can believe it.
I guess they didn't try to pet them. They didn't come up really, really close or anything. But yeah, so, everything ramped up the production of cotton in the 1700s. Starting in the 1700s was Industrial Revolution. There's a cotton gin, which, takes the seeds out, which is handy because it takes a long time by hand. There was the spinning and weaving machines. And by the 1840s, there was so much demand, like these mills with other high-powered machines needed so much cotton that most of the production shifted from India to America. Like America started to outpace India, which before, the British East India Company, they'd kind of alighted there and been like, oh, good place to grow cotton. I think we'll do that.
So 1840s, all this cotton that was going to the U.S. mills was coming from the slave fields in the South.
Yepers, yeah.
Gotcha.
And by the 1850s, cotton was the backbone of the United States Southern economy, and your ancestors are not in the clear if they liked wearing clothing during that period of time. Could not afford any slave and lived in the wrong place.
Yeah, that was before you could buy slave-free cotton. They didn't have the labeling that we have today.
No, they didn't. Yeah. So cotton needs a lot of sun and a long frost-free period. It needs heavy soils, but they don't have to have. They can just be average nutrients. They don't have to be super nutritious soils. It's naturally a perennial, but it's grown as an annual to slow pest.
That's interesting. Oh,
it's known as a thirsty crop because it's associated with a lot of desertification and salination, apparently.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and so that was the economic driver that kept slavery profitable, basically.
There you go.
And as I understand it, Juneteenth actually celebrates or marks the day that the last group of slaves got the word that they'd been emancipated. and those slaves were on
in Texas,
in Texas on a plantation. So I think they were probably harvesting cotton right up.
Probably so, yep.
Yeah, and they probably...
And after as sharecroppers.
Right. And so they probably didn't get probably didn't get their back wages for those 2 years they worked as slaves while they were...
I'm thinking no.
Yeah, probably not. So, okay, well, thanks very much, Rebecca, for that great little story about cotton. And it's just a reminder that our life, our lives are tied up with plants, really, agriculture. When you study ecology, this is something that you can relate to all the time, because ecologically speaking, we are tied to all the plants and the animals and all the other things on this planet, and it sort of overlaps our economic life when we have something like cotton coming along. And organic cotton, I try to buy organic whenever I can. Normal cotton takes a lot of herbicides and pesticides, and as Rebecca said, it leads to a lot of desertification. It really depletes the soils.
Uzbekistan is having that problem. Also, apparently, a lot of it has been genetically modified to be resistant to insects.
Right.
Which there's signs that might be sort of having the effect of breeding super insects.
Oh, yeah.
Or resistant to the resistance. So that's great.
Yeah. Well, that's the kind of thing that's happening. As long as our agriculture is based on chemicals and unsustainable practices, that's the sort of thing that's going to keep happening.
A lot of it's the desertification and salination comes from it also being grown with irrigation a lot, apparently.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks, Rebecca, for talking about cotton. And so we've talked about cotton, and we've talked about nuclear power, Father's Day, summer solstice. Now it's time to go on to ecological news and information. So here we go. Our top story, which actually has been widely covered by the mainstream media. In fact, this story in Ohio has been covered worldwide, actually. It's made the papers in England, and the New York Times has picked it up.
It's our good old friend Larry Householder.
Right. So this is our HB6 update.
Yes. The gift that keeps on giving.
Right. Which, if you've followed our show, if you've been following our show, we've been covering HB6 since before it was introduced to the legislature. We were talking about this before it even went to its first hearing in Columbus. And we were actually there at the first hearing in Columbus, telling all telling all those legislators, don't do this.
Yeah.
This is insane. But
in exactly that tone, because it was actually Joe doing it.
Not exactly that. I was a little more like, well, this is insane.
Yeah,
because it was, but
decorum.
But they didn't listen, and they passed it, and now the disastrous effects are still echoing. And but one of the effects was this past week they expelled Larry Householder, and who was the chair of the Ohio House at the time when they pushed House Bill 6 through. The vote was actually 75-21, which is kind of nice. It was a very, very bipartisan vote.
Bye-bye, Larry.
Yeah, so he's out. He had to do literally the walk of shame because he voted himself on his own expulsion. He voted against his expulsion, surprisingly, or not surprisingly. And before the vote, he sort of held that whole House chamber captive for like an hour, where he railed on and on about how innocent he was.
Right.
Unfortunately for him, 3 out of the 6 co-conspirators that have been charged in this have already pled guilty.
Right.
So it's kind of hard to...
So it's purely coincidental that he got this giant amount of money and he voted on this thing that nobody wanted except for the people who gave him the money. Is that it? It's just all circumstantial. It looks bad, but hey, sometimes that happens.
Right. Well, and somehow all the people around him who were involved in the fight against the referendum to repeal House Bill 6, somehow they all broke the law and admitted to it and, pled guilty, but somehow he, the one who was actually organizing the whole thing, somehow he's saying he didn't break the law, even though they all did.
Which if his head is actually that far up someplace it should not be, he needs to not be allowed to walk around in public unattended.
Well, he says he's going to be back. He says, that once he gets cleared, because he's going to fight this in the courts, that once he's found not guilty, he'll run again and try to get back in the legislature, which, anybody else, you might think that would be a boast, a meaningless boast. But he had already been knocked out of the legislature by previous corruption charges.
Wow.
So then he came back from that to get elected with the help of, millions of dollars from First Energy to get reappointed as chair of the Ohio House.
Ohio.
So yeah. So again, Ohio makes the headlines worldwide with House Bill 6 because they finally bumped Larry Householder. Now the effort to repeal House Bill 6 continues. So far that they've repealed pieces of it. They repealed the part where we would all get charged to subsidize the nuclear plants up on Lake Erie, which is good. But they've kept the parts that eliminated all the support for wind and solar in Ohio, and they've kept the part that we are all going to get charged to subsidize the coal plants down on the Ohio River.
Spiffy.
So the bits and pieces are still being fought, but the people who pushed this through are all still in office, and except for Larry Householder. He's the only one that's been expelled. And in fact, one particular fella that during the testimony on this, actually went back and forth with a couple times on the House of the Floor, Dick Stein. He is one of the people who voted against expelling Householder, one of the 21, the shameful 21. And
at that point, you knew you weren't going to win. Why not turn on the guy,
Well, that's a good question. And the answer is maybe found in the fact that rather than any kind of effect for him, any kind of subsequent punishment for being involved in this $65 million bribery scandal, the Governor DeWine, has appointed him to the Ohio Power Siting Board, which is the body that gets to decide if wind or solar projects go forward.
Oh, so it's what you would call vice signaling. We hear a lot about virtue signaling. It was like, I am dirty. Give me a job where I can get a lot of dirty money. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was sort of a signal to First Energy. I'm still here. I'm still on your side. I'll stick with the dirty powers as long as I possibly can. I just got a Happy Father's Day text. That's nice. Yes, I am a father. I have 2 kids. They're both living in Denver, Colorado right now. But thank you, listener, for wishing me a Happy Father's Day. All right. So next story, not as pleasant a story, unfortunately, and that is that there's a plan out of Denmark to build nuclear-powered barges. And they want to build...
Don't barges sink sometimes? I'm concerned about this plan already.
Sometimes they do.
Yeah.
But especially when they're carrying really heavy stuff like plutonium and thorium and so forth. We had some trouble with ships with oil sinking quite a bit. Mm-hmm, yeah, I thought I remembered something about that for the entire time I've been alive. Right, but this the startup company in Denmark has plans to build literally thousands of these floating nuclear reactors, or floating Chernobyls, as they might be called. Oh no! And but these are liquid sodium reactors, so they're like, they're really safe. And in fact, the CEO of the company is quoted in a news story as saying, "I want lots and lots of accidents so we can prove how safe these are."
Oh, that's nice.
To show that it's not a big deal if one of these melts down, or, because we've got so many safety precautions, so many safety procedures, that it's not going to be a big deal if one of these, melts down. And like the sodium, they've got a sodium plug at the bottom of the reactor. So if the reactor goes out of control, one of the things that happens is that plug melts, and then the whole assembly pours down into the bottom of the ship, of the barge, where they've got water that's supposedly going to then quench the reaction. Of course, then you have this incredibly contaminated barge full of sodium. Yeah. What do you do with that? Which,
I'm pretty sure even sodium reactors have things on them that are radioactive. Do they not?
Yeah.
And those would go in the water if anything went wrong. Lots of radioactivity in the water. Great.
That's what they're saying. Now they're also saying that, because it's liquid salt, it won't dissolve that much in seawater.
Whoa,
I'm like, what?
Wait. Okay, I cook things. Salt, do you ever make pasta? Salt does dissolve in water.
Yeah, so...
Oh, because it's seawater. It's already has some
salt in it. Yeah, but
I don't know.
Yeah, no. If you're an investor and somebody comes to you with this idea that, hey, invest in Danish nuclear barges, if the person who is the CEO in his push in his marketing of this says some things that fly against basic physics, like salt doesn't dissolve in water.
I think it does.
Yeah, you might want to think twice before throwing money at this project. But one thing that's happening is that...
for one thing, there is the salt water in the ocean already, so... It probably didn't start off salty. Probably some salt dissolved in there. I'm thinking is how it got salty, right?
Yeah, I mean the Earth's oceans used to be actually less salty,
right?
Over eons.
It comes out of the rocks.
It comes out of the rocks.
It goes into the ocean.
It's sort of a marker of the age of a planet. Actually, if they've got an ocean, how salty is it? Because that's how how long that water's been up against the rocks that have the sodium in them. So. Yeah, and interestingly, the salt level in our bodies theoretically matches the salt level of the ocean when cellular life evolved billions of years ago.
Which is why we can't just drink seawater.
Right, because now the ocean's too salty for us. Life couldn't evolve there this way it did back when it was, less. The oceans were less salty. So... yeah, but there's still plenty of room for more salt to get dissolved in there. So if you take a sodium-cooled reactor full of uranium and plutonium and dump it into the ocean, you're going to contaminate the ocean.
You got places like, Great Salt Lake or the Dead Sea in Israel where things
where
just
it's saltier
in the water because you can't.
Right.
Like you just float on the surface. You can't really get down into the water very much.
Right. And,
because it's too salty. So we know water can, in fact, get saltier than it is right now.
Definitely.
It could get that salty.
Yep.
At least.
Let's hope Denmark fails in this. But one thing that's kind of driving Denmark to push something like this, though, I think might be desperation because a fair amount of their country is below sea level. And along with one of the biggest effects of global warming, of course, is rising sea levels. And the fact that global warming is proceeding apace came out back in June 7th, when they announced that the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere hit a record over 419 parts per million, the most carbon dioxide they've ever measured since they started measuring over 100 years ago. Now, hopefully, theoretically, the number is going to drop a bit for the next couple months because the plants up here in the northern hemisphere have started absorbing more carbon dioxide because their leaves have come out. So we might see a little dip, but the overall trend is and has been continued increase of carbon. So that's an important note to make that back in June 7th, we had the world record, the most carbon ever. And so we've got to keep working at reducing the amount of carbon because the governments aren't moving fast enough, folks. So it's kind of up to us. Yeah. And one of the biggest ways we Americans can stop or can reduce our carbon load is through our choice of cars. And I wanted to say that the sale of electric and plug-in hybrid cars are going through the roof right now. A lot of people are making the switch. And, like me, when I switched to a plug-in hybrid in 2019, they're discovering that the electric cars have superior acceleration. They're not noisy. It's this really nice, quiet ride. In every way, driving an electric car is better than driving one of these big, noisy, smelly, because you get behind one of these cars with a big exhaust. It's just better to have an electric car. And in fact, my car, the plug-in Pacifica Hybrid, they've had to stop making it because of the chip shortage, which is affecting the whole auto industry.
Wow.
But So now used Pacifica hybrids are selling for almost the same price that they were new.
Wow.
And people are making all kinds of profits selling their used Pacifica hybrids, and they've got enough money to buy a whole nother kind of car. And one of those cars I just wanted to mention is that Jeep now has a plug-in hybrid. You can buy a plug-in hybrid Jeep.
Which we make lots of Jeeps in Toledo. I don't know if we make that kind here, though.
I think we make parts for it. I'm not sure we make the whole plug-in hybrid Jeep, but if Jeep's doing it, it's going to happen, and it is happening, and it's good that it's happening. So when you make your next car purchase, don't just buy another internal combustion engine. Those things are smelly. They have poor acceleration. Most of the energy, I've said this before, since the theoretical limit of efficiency of an internal combustion engine is only 17%, you think what you're doing is using gas to drive somewhere, but 85% of what you're using that gas for is to generate waste heat and make noise, and generate CO2. So electric cars only need 25% of the power of an internal combustion engine car to go the same distance. So, do it. Get a plug-in hybrid, and that will be a step towards the green future.
Here.
All right. So how are we doing for time here? Let's see. We got about 5 minutes left. Plenty of time for a call or a text at 877-909-1007. Again, this is our special Father's Day episode, and we're looking for stories of how your father helped you get closer to nature, get interested or involved or get introduced to the natural world. And my father really helped that. One of the things he instilled in me was fishing, love of fishing down there. When I was growing up, I lived for a while in Elmira, New York, and they have the Chemung River down there, which is a beautiful little river. And he and I used to go, and some of my happiest childhood memories were fishing with my dad on the Chemung River. That was really nice. And your dad was quite the outdoorsman too, wasn't he, Rebecca?
He was, yeah. This comes from my paternal grandfather, who was a part-time hunting guide and stonemason. And apparently,
hunting guide.
For part of his childhood, he lived up in Petoskey on the Odawa Reservation. And to the end of his life, apparently, once a year, a bunch of Odawa guys would come and swing by his house in Six Lakes on their way to, I think, Chicago to build skyscrapers. And they'd all go hunting together. One of the things my dad really always admired about him was that he knew the name of everything in the woods, And he sort of, in fact, after Grandpa Stanley died, Dad used to sneak away and say he was going, swimming or something, and he'd bring mushrooms. He'd bring mushrooms and put them on Grandpa Stanley's grave, because when he was alive, he always was really interested if you brought him any kind of a fungus. He'd be like, "Oh yeah, that's a such and such. That's really neat. You don't see too many of those." So cool. Yeah, Daddy was interested in that, and he took us. Really, especially when we lived in upstate New York. There was a lot of stuff you could do.
Yeah.
A lot of hunting, camping. Well, we didn't go hunting, but he does that with his other relatives. He took us camping, took us hiking, the whole deal, basically, in 4 different states that I grew up in. So I kind of got to see a lot of America before I was 12.
Nice. And if you are a father, of course, on this Father's Day, and you've got kids, think about taking them out. Think about taking them to the park, maybe the Wood County Park District, or maybe one of the Toledo's Metro Parks, or
it's maybe not a national park though, because I don't know. I hear it's all over the internet all over Facebook that there's just a crush at the national parks right now because everybody is trying to make up for lost time.
Yeah, which is both good and bad. I mean, it's great so many people are trying to get out into nature, but the thing about the national parks is that people are crushing the big ones like Yellowstone and places like that. But there's hundreds of national parks. Most of us have never even heard of. So
very true.
With a little bit of research, you could put yourself into a national park that doesn't have a lot of people.
That isn't like the mall, only with trees and stuff.
Right. All right. Well, we got a nice little text from a listener. They pointed out that shipping is one of our major pollution sources, and that's That's absolutely true. And, which is one reason, I'm a green. I have to say that up front. And one of our things is locally based economics. I can't see shipping stuff all the way over from China that we could be making here. So,
Good point.
yeah. And let's see. And it was also, according to this listener, this is a reason not to overconsume. And that's a good lesson for Father's Day.
Oh, yeah, it was good not to overconsume.
All right. Well, we're here in the last minute of the show. I just want to thank everybody for listening. And remember, no nukes.
You're here.
And this is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off.
Bye.
Fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia.